In this video, we will walk through the process to export group policy objects, GPOs, from Active Directory to Intune with the Group Policy Analyzer tool in Intune. This could be part of a hybrid coexistence state indefinitely, or it could be part of a larger plan to ultimately migrate to Azure Active Directory and Intune, and ultimately depend on solely Azure Active Directory, Enter ID, and Intune, and move away from Active Directory. Before we get into an overview of the steps that are necessary, I want to have a little disclaimer. Not all group policy objects will translate. You might have to recreate some of these policy settings in Intune with either the templates or the settings catalogs or custom settings via CSP, which is the configuration service provider. Most likely, you'll have to use a combination of all three. When we go through this process, you'll see when you import what the success rate is. The report will tell you which ones will migrate to MDM successfully, which ones will have issues, which ones will need to be recreated, etc. And so the first step is to export your GPOs from Active Directory. Now, if your GPOs have conflicts and are too monolithic and they should be consolidated or combined, you'll want to do this ahead of time so that when you export your GPOs, it's going to make more logical sense in Intune. And you will want to export your GPOs separately so that when we import them into Intune, we will have a separate policy in Intune for each one of the GPOs that makes logically sense. Which brings us into our next step, importing GPOs separately into Intune. So we will have a separate step where we import each GPO into Intune so we can analyze each one of those GPOs and then import those separately. Once we've imported each one of those GPOs for candidates as separate policies in Intune, we're going to review each one of those imported GPOs for the MDM supported settings, see which settings are supported in Intune and will actually import successfully, which ones might have to be changed, modified, or recreated, and which ones won't be able to be imported or migrated, I should say, into Intune. They just have to be scrapped and then just recreated altogether in some other fashion. Next, we will take all of this information. We will plan for non-supported and migratable settings. And we will map out what we can import, what we can migrate, and what we can't, and what we'll have to manually intervene with. And the very last step is to sort by those settings in each group policy that we imported, by those that are supported to migrate, and migrate per each imported GPO into a policy. And that would actually conclude the process of migrating GPOs from Active Directory to Intune. The scope that falls beyond this video is mitigating anything that wouldn't import. This video just focuses on importing from Active Directory to Intune for group policy. But it's worth mentioning that it's not a complete process. You will still have to plan for anything that doesn't migrate and accommodate for that. So let's jump right into it. Okay, so we begin with exporting GPOs from Active Directory so that we can import them into Intune for analysis and then migration. We will go to a domain controller and open our Group Policy Management Console, GPMC, and then we will go to the domain and go to Group Policy Objects, and we will get a list of all the group policy objects there that we can export and select which ones we want to export. For this demonstration, I am going to export two GPOs. I'm going to begin with the account policy. I'm going to right click on it and I'm going to say backup. I'm going to browse a location to back it up to, and I'm going to give it a description, and the description is pretty important. I'm going to call it account policy, and I'm going to back it up to there. And then hit OK. And I'm going to do the same thing with the default domain policy. Now, if we browse to that location for the backups, we're going to find a separate folder for each one of those. And what's important to realize is that for each one of these backups, there's going to be a GP report.xml file. When we go into Intune and select the file for the import, that is going to be the file that we're going to select for the import into Intune. And that's all there is to the backups. Pretty easy. Let's move on to the next step. Now we will import and review the settings that were successful or will be successful to import to MDM policies for the AD exports of the GPOs that we exported. So we will go to intune.microsoft.com. We will go to Devices. We will go to Group Policy Analytics. And we will click on Import for each one of the group policy objects that we exported. We will select the file. Again, that is per GPO that we exported, and that is the GPO report. We'll click on Next, No Scope Tags, and Create. And so we've got the account policy first, and we will do the same thing for the default domain policy. And we will see each one of those imported GPOs ready for analysis and migration. We see as an overview the percentage for each one of those policies on the MDM support, which basically says how much of the group policy settings will be migratable to Intune. So let's go ahead and jump into the next section. We will review the MDM support and migrate the settings for just one of these because it's the same process for both. So if we go ahead and click on, for instance, the default domain policy and MDM support percentage right here, it will bring us to a result of all the MDM support settings. If we filter on the MDM support column, right there, it allows us to sort on all the different settings in which ones will definitely be supported in the migration and which ones will not, and which ones you just have to update or convert. As we look through this, not a ton of stuff in this. So we see a deprecated record that would be disabled, and we just have to update that in our policy with the Intune settings. We see all of these settings that would be migrated. These settings would not be migrated, so we'd have to look into each one of these settings. And these Google Chrome settings, we would have to migrate to Edge. So those are all decision points that would have to be, planned and worked into the new policy. So the idea here is we could get a bit of the settings imported into Intune, and the rest of them decide on how we want to handle those. Migrate those to Edge. Those are pretty easy. We could probably deal with those as template settings in the policy once we migrate, or CSP settings. These ones are just not going to work, the no ones. And do we really need those? Or is that something that is handled with Azure? For instance, all these password complexity stuff in a hybrid environment, Azure handles that. So it's probably not important to migrate those settings from AD because Azure handles those differently. Just an example. So say we're okay with those. Let's go back. Let's filter. And let's select on our filter only yes and apply. And let's go ahead and click on migrate, and it'll migrate all the settings that would actually work as far as migration goes. And actually on the next page, we just want to select the ones that say yes. Then we will click on next. Next. We will give it a similar name like a default domain policy. Click on next. No scope tags. And at this point, I don't think that we should assign this. I think that it's more relevant to just create the policy and then later put it into a pilot or test group, probably a test group first and then a pilot group to see how it behaves. So we're not going to assign it at this point, but just keep in mind that eventually you'll want to test and pilot this. And then deploy. And notice that in your policies for devices configuration, you're going to now see that your policy that you have just imported is there as a settings catalog. So you could review all those settings that I've imported if you clicked on it and went down to the configuration settings and edit. And anything that did import will show up in this list. And of course, you could modify or add as needed. Now, if we go back to devices, and then group policy analytics, and take a look at that same account policy, and let's sort again by MDM support, and let's say, we're not taking a look at all the nils. Actually, let's take a look at the default domain policy. It gives you often on the ones that are not nil, specific information on the MDM support. For instance, if we took a look at migrate to edge and then value, it'll give you very often the value you need and the CSP mapping. So if it doesn't migrate, it very often tells you what the new settings would be to include in the policy, which is very helpful. In summary, this is not a perfect solution, but it may save you a lot of time in creating your policies in Intune when you want to have a hybrid environment and start offloading some of those policies between Active Directory and Intune, or start planning for the future when you will be set up in a place where you can be prepared to offload from Active Directory into Intune, and in the future, just being a spot where you can probably be very close to getting away from Active Directory altogether. It's better to start putting these policies in Intune now and testing and piloting and troubleshooting and be prepared for that future state. In a hybrid environment, typically Active Directory GPO takes precedence over Intune. So careful consideration and policy assignment needs to be carefully planned. And don't forget, just because you created this policy doesn't mean it's assigned yet. So definitely test, pilot, and then roll out. I sincerely thank you for taking the time to watch this video so far. I encourage you to like my video, subscribe to my channel, and hit the notification bell for future updates on videos. Feel free also to leave a comment. You can contribute by giving me a coffee through the link below. Patrons get exclusive access to some content. Members get access to all exclusive content, which includes things such as a ton of PowerShell scripts, troubleshooting articles, and how-to guides, etc. I look forward to seeing you in the next video.